our next speaker, who is Dr. John Francis. He is an environmental educator, a former UN Goodwill ambassador. And in 1971, he witnessed an oil spill in San Francisco Bay and stopped using motorized vehicles. He subsequently took a 17-year vow of silence. He walked across the entire United States, stopping occasionally, and in the process earned a PhD. He is author of Planetwalker, 17 Years of Silence and 22 Years of Walking, The Ragged Edge of Silence, and an illustrated children's book coming out this September, Human Kindness, True Stories of Compassion and Generosity That Changed the World. He founded and directs Planetwalk. We are honored to welcome to Authors and Artists, Dr. John Francis.
Well, here I am, and I hope I can do this, actually share this screen. We practiced, Liz, and thank you so much. And I have to say, I am just so honored to be here among such an illustrious group of people that have really touched my heart this morning. And Dina, thank you so much for your words. And Jillian, oh my God, I see there's a place where we're going to be able to schmooze at the end of this, huh? So I want to be able to schmooze with you all. And I want to begin. I'm going to begin by sharing a video. It was done by CBS, and it will give a little encapsulation, not like you did, Liz. Yours great. Your introduction was great. And here I want to just start off with this video, and then I'm going to play a little music, and then I'm going to start talking, which is kind of a good thing for me now. Okay.
It's graduation time again, and you can be sure that there will be many speeches urging young people to go out there and change the world. And those same young people will be wondering how. Well, tonight we have the story of one man who set about changing the world by first changing himself. Our story begins on a misty night in 1971 when two oil tankers collide beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, spilling more than 500,000 gallons of crude into the bay. At that time, John Francis was just another hippie living in West Marin County. But when he saw the oozing sludge and dying birds, he wanted to protest in a way that others thought was crazy. Francis wanted to stop riding in cars.
And I found myself on the road walking, and I said, wow, I'm already walking here. I'm just going to keep walking.
With his banjo as his companion, John Francis challenged anyone who would listen to believe in his mission.
I found myself arguing with my friends if one person could make a difference by not riding in an automobile.
So he had another idea. To stop the arguments, he would simply stop talking.
I decided that I would stop speaking just for one day to give my community a gift of my silence, because John was a big talker.
This is Francis back then. He was 27 years old on the day he stopped talking in order to truly listen. That day's silence lasted 17 years.
When I first stopped speaking, I could hear all the conversations pretty much that I ever had. After about a month of not speaking, they soon went away.
Without the conversations, John had only to listen to himself, and what he heard disturbed him. He realized that he had been living a lie about who he was as a Black man in a white world.
What I saw in the media was that I could be a buffoon, or I could be a criminal, but could I be the person I am right now? And I didn't see that person. It took me to just stop talking until I said, oh my God, there you are. and then I just rediscovered who I was. And I didn't need to lie anymore. Well, I couldn't lie because I didn't talk. I mean, I just couldn't do it.
Francis went from being this know-it-all to someone who wanted to know more. So he began a pilgrimage that left his footprints across the country.
John Francis. Linda, Lindell.
You guys taking a ride? You walked all the way out.
I saw America. I heard America speak to me. And I was very taken by what my experience was.
What Francis didn't know at that time was that he was ahead of his time, on the forefront of what would become a movement, environmentalism. When he found that Southern Oregon University offered a new course in environmental studies, he walked to Ashland and enrolled. He then walked to Missoula, Montana to get a master's degree, eventually ending up at the University of Wisconsin to get his PhD. Along the way, he also taught a discussion class. Remember, all without speaking.
Sometimes I would make these signs like so. My class would sit around, they go, "What's he saying? What's he saying?" No, I think he's talking about clear cutting. No, that's not clear cutting. He was using a handsaw and he wouldn't clear cut with a, you can clear cut with a handsaw. I think he's talking about selective forestry. And I would just kind of back out because this is a discussion class and let the discussion go on.
And Francis's education was evolving as well.
I thought environment was about human-made ugliness and pollution and endangered species. I started to realize that environment was really much more than that. That it involved, human rights and civil rights and economic equity and how we treat each other when we meet each other.
All along his journey from West Coast to East, the man who walked and didn't talk was being heard. In the 22 years he spent trekking across America, the once counterculture concept of environmentalism had become mainstream. By the time he arrived in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Coast Guard invited him to write pollution regulations for the nation's waterways, and the United Nations appointed him environmental ambassador.
I couldn't have dreamed that up. I couldn't have seen it. When people said, one person can't make a difference, I have to say there were doubts sometimes, as I'm walking and I am alone and I am just a black man with a banjo walking across America. I think we just make that commitment to make the journey. And once we commit ourselves to doing it, we change. We change ourselves from just sitting on the fence thinking about it to actually jumping in the field and making a mad dash or a slow walk. And I think that's our journey. That's all of our journeys. I think each one of us has that journey, that potential in ourselves to do that.
John Francis just published a book called Planetwalker and is getting ready for another walk across the United States.
I'm back. Wow. That's amazing. I really like this. Anyway, I'm coming to you today from the ancestral land of the Lenape, and they're part of the Delaware. And I began my walk in the land of the Miwok and walked across the nation. But this is the music that accompanied me. And I want to start with this music because I hope that it conveys something, the things that maybe I can't say, because there are a lot of things that I guess go beyond our language right now. Well, so thank you for being here. And I'd like to start off by thanking people for actually coming and hearing me, because as I walked across the country, as I began this journey, I realized that if you're speaking and there's no one there to hear you, or there's no one there to receive a message from you, then there's no communication. And what I'm hoping today through this technology is that we are really able to communicate. And there's so much that we have to communicate if we're going to go on and continue. And what was said at the last part, when I started speaking, I really came out with the idea in my mind is that, I started off by seeing an oil spill and giving up riding in cars. And I thought that was it. I thought oil pollution in the marine environment, that was what environment was about. But my journey taught me as I walked across the country, and I want to tell you a little bit more about that, but it taught me that environment was really much more than just about pollution and loss of species and habitat and those things. It was about if we are part of the environment, if you and I are part of the environment, it was about, well, then how we treat each other, because as we treat each other, that's going to manifest in the environment around us. And, the indigenous people, the Native Americans knew that in a way that we don't know. We just don't live that. The way we treat each other is going to manifest in the physical environment around us. And so it's about human rights and civil rights and gender equality and economic equity and all the ways that we relate. And there are going to be some conversations that we have to have. And Dina mentioned that, and I know Jillian mentioned those conversations that we're going to have if we're going to keep on going. And one of the things that I've discovered that we need to bring to those conversations, and I wrote this children's book, and I'm going to try and just put that up right now and see if I can actually do that. It's called Share Screen and Share. There. Human kindness and its true stories of compassion and generosity that changed the world. I don't imagine we're going to stop being kind to one another. I hope that we increase these stories, and the stories go from way back to where we didn't have written history to the present, and I hope the future. So I want to start out by saying, I began this journey, and not because I was so brilliant. Someone says, John, how did you know to do that? I didn't know to do any of these things. I just started out of my heart what I felt I could do. And so when I saw the oil spill, when I saw the birds flapping around in oil, I wanted to do something to ameliorate that, to take care of that. And I couldn't think of anything. I had no degree. I had just finished high school, and all I could think of was not to ride or drive in automobiles and motorized vehicles, and to walk. And so soon after I took that decision in my little village in California, in Inverness, my friends started arguing with me, and I would argue back and forth about, one person could do this and that's what we needed to do. And I realized that I didn't really understand. I didn't really know if it would work, if I could make a difference. And so on my 27th birthday, I decided I had been talking and arguing so much that I was going to give up riding and driving in cars and not speak for one day. Not just one day. It turned into 17 years, right? It turned into 17 years because I learned in that one day that I had not been listening to anyone. I was already thinking about what I was going to say back when someone started talking to me, that I knew better, I had the better answer. And even if they said what I believed, I could say it better. And that one day I realized I had stopped learning. And if I could just listen to people, I might learn something. I would at least learn what they were thinking or what they wanted to say. And so I took a vow for a year and for another year. And each year I renewed that vow until I had been silent for 17 years. Now, during this time, I was walking in California, and in 1983, I started walking across the United States. And I have to say that if people weren't kind to me, I don't think I would have made it. I wouldn't be here standing here right now or sitting here in my little writing shed and, telling you that I had a great time, and I wouldn't have probably written a book, a story about true stories of compassion and generosity, which I felt on my journey across America. And I was very fortunate in that journey to be taken in by Native American families. When I walked across the northern part of the country, I was taken in by the Cheyenne River Indian reservation, the people there who took me in and fed me and helped me cross the reservation. And I learned so much from them that when I got to South Dakota, I started working as a printer. I worked as a printer there, and the native people from Philandro Indian School came up and gave me a powwow. And my friend, a co-worker, his parents and his family made an honor blanket. And Gary Holybull, who was a medicine man, came down from Minnesota. And my father came out from New Jersey, and he said, there's a powwow going on, and there are all these people are dancing. And he says, how do you do this? And, I kind of hunched my shoulders because I don't know, I didn't know. I didn't really know. He said, well, did you get all these white people and Indians and you're black? And how do you do that? And I said, well, it's a good thing I didn't talk, because I had no answer how this was happening. But there's one story from the book which really resonated with me and resonates with me, and I hope it does with you as well. As I was living in Watertown, South Dakota, and there are lots of Native people there, and not very many African-American people. I think there was one other family in my town, in Watertown. And I was renting I rented a television set from a place where they rent television sets. And my coworker, he said, you rented a television set, John. I want to do that. I said, you just go over there, rent you the set. He went over and he came back to me the next day and he said, they wouldn't rent one to me. And I was shocked. And he said, well, John, I'm an Indian. So I went to the store and I asked in my silent way, about my friend, who you wouldn't rent. And the guy says, look, John, I'm a Christian, and it really, and I'm going to ask you because maybe you can shed some light on this. He says, I've rented to Native people. Everything in that time, it was Indians and not Native people. But I've rented to Native people, and they don't understand a contract. I'd sign a contract with them. They're supposed to bring the TV back. They just never do. And he says, can you enlighten me why they might not understand what the contract says? And to me, it just came as a flash. And I don't know how I mean, I'm talking now, but back in the time when I didn't talk, everything was sign language. And I can remember making, reading a contract and signing it at the end. And then, I made so that I took a bow and made it look like I was, and then I took the arrow from that bow and I broke the arrow. And the guy says, well, that's a peace treaty. And then I went, and he looked at me and he goes, oh, we tore the peace treaty up. And I went, and many, many treaties were just torn up. How would you expect, a Native person to honor your contract that you keep tearing up? And he looked at me and he said, oh, John, no one's ever explained that to me. And I could tell he was really sincere. He was really sincere about not understanding. And so I wrote that in my book. I wrote that in the book. And that's the other story. Writing it in the book, I tried to get that book published. No one wanted to publish it. No one wanted. They said it's just a hodgepodge. Just a hodgepodge. I got people that say, "Oh, I read. Oh no, that's not." And I don't know why. Eventually, I came back to my community. I came back to my community in California, and I said, "No one wants to publish this book." This is after I had started speaking, and they said, "Well, we're going to pay for that book to get published." And so I self-published it as a book that I had written. I had kept journals and paintings of the whole journey. And I got to self-publish that book. I raised enough money. People bought books ahead of time. People just gave me a few $1,000, $100 here or $50 here. I think I raised almost $25,000 to self-publish this book. And so I learned about what publishing was. It wasn't until after I published the book that I took a book around, and then I was selling this book myself. And every time I went to speak, I would sell the book. And I go, oh, publishing. So that's it. It's a profit deal here, because it seemed as though I was making more money than as a publisher and an author than people would say you could make as an author. I said, oh, I get it. So so I had to self-publish first before I could become published. And then once I had a published book, I took the published book around, and they said, well, how many books have you sold? And I could say, oh, 5,000. Well, that's a lot of speaking, and that's a lot of books going out. And eventually National Geographic decided that they would publish the book. And I won't go into the blah, blah. They said no, they said yes, they said no, they said eventually. And as National Geographic for the last time said no, someone else from Hollywood said, hey, we want to make a movie about that. And then when I took the book around, everybody wanted to publish it, but National Geographic published it. Oh, well, so I'm talking to you about writing a book, publishing it, but the voice of the book for me, and that's when I started speaking. It's like I went to school, I learned about environment. It was the getting a PhD was something I just couldn't imagine, but I did. And I remember that my major professor said to me when I wasn't speaking still, he said, John, you're going to need to get this degree, because the people that are going to need to hear what you say, the people that are going to need to hear you aren't going to listen to you if you don't have these 3 letters after your name. I couldn't believe that. And then I discovered that there were people who won't listen to you if you don't have these 3 letters. He said, your message isn't going to change. We don't doubt that you're going to keep the same message, that it's how we treat each other, that we really need to treat each other in a way that is, good for the environment, that promotes environmental sustainability. That's how we need to treat each other. And so all the things that we're hearing today about the Black farmers, about the Native people and the decolonization, those are conversations that we're going to have. I believe that kindness is going to be a necessary ingredient in having that conversation, that we have to be kind to each other as we talk about difficult things. And as one of our poets said, I wanted to just say, to acknowledge the suffering that's going on right now in the Ukraine as we sit here in relative comfort, the suffering that's going on in the Ukraine and around the world. So our voices are very important. The voices of writers and artists are extremely important to get that message, to get a message out to all of us. And eventually I ended up in Washington, D.C., walking across the United States. On the 20th anniversary, I started to speak. It was the most amazing thing. After 17 years of not speaking, I got to Washington on Earth Day, and that's when I said, thank you for being here. As I said to you, thank you for being here. And I explained, because it's about, the message and someone receiving it. There has to be someone to receive this message. And I hadn't heard myself speak in so many years that I didn't recognize my voice. And so I turned around to look, where that voice was coming from. Now, my mother, she was in the audience, and she jumped out of her chair going, hallelujah, Johnny's talking. And I was like, oh, who says that? And who's saying what I'm thinking? How can that be? Someone would say, and then I realized that it was me speaking for the first time. After all these years, I realized that was me. And I started to chuckle to myself, standing up there on the stage with all these people, from the newspaper people, from the Los Angeles Times and the NPR, and they were all out there looking at me. And my dad was out there, and I was kind of oh, my dad looked up at me, and he says, yeah, he is crazy. Look at him up there. He's just laughing and giggling. and so I started speaking, and I started speaking on Earth Day because I wanted to remind myself that I was going to speak for the environment. And the environment had become much more than it had when I started. And the walk across America, this academic institutions that allowed me to learn there were exactly really important for me, but also the people and the land that spoke to me, of listening to the water and the river and the brooks and hearing the conversations and listening really was the important part of my journey and my learning. Now, I could tell stories all night long about walking across, because it took me 7 years and 1 day to get from one ocean to the other ocean. 7 years and 1 day to dip my foot in one ocean into the other ocean. But if, I would love to stop right now, and I would like to see if there are any questions so that I could answer. And I think that that's probably the better way, because what's going to happen is a lot of the questions may be something that I can talk about, that journey and the book. So how about if we do that?
Yes, we can definitely do that. So people should feel free to use the Q&A to put their questions in, and I will read them out. So let me see. We have some appreciation for your talk, and the poems from before. And someone asks, what is the name of your book?
The name of, well, I can tell you all the names of all my books. The first book was Planetwalker, Changing the World One Step at a Time. And the second book, which was a rewrite of Planetwalker, was actually just not a rewrite, but just more to Planetwalk, was National Geographic. And that is Planetwalker, 17 years of silence, 22 years of walking. And then I was able to publish another book with National Geographic. They asked me to publish one on not speaking in silence. And my wife says this is the best book. It is called The Ragged Edge of Silence, Finding Peace in a Noisy World. And she may think that because I bring in a lot of traditions where silence is used in a lot of faiths, a lot of traditions, and not just my own, which I kind of, as I said, kind of stumbled upon. You know, just my parents would say, "Shut up, John." And my dad would say that to me. And as I started talking again, he goes, no, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that, because I might just, keep quiet. And the other book is Human Kindness, True Stories of Compassion and Generosity That Changed the World. And if you went on Amazon or Target or Walmart or any of those online places, you could pre-order the book of Human Kindness. And it's an illustrated book that the illustrator is Josie Boggs, and she's from the UK, and she did, I just think, a wonderful job. It's a children's book that's for all of us children.
This next question is from Matt Atwood, who's on the ANA board and is a wonderful programming librarian for Northfield Public Library. He writes, "Thank you, Dr. Francis. I'm curious about which of the following was most difficult and which was most rewarding: being silent, not using vehicles, writing as opposed to publishing an adult book, or writing as opposed to publishing a children's book." And he says he's looking forward to your forthcoming children's book.
Wow. So the question is, what was most challenging?
I think which was most difficult and which was most rewarding.
The writing of the children's or the adult?
And he also includes the being silent and not using vehicles. So,
well, that's a really intricate and good question. Well, I think if I hadn't started walking, I don't think I would have discovered the silence. I think that being in nature, and I was very fortunate to live in a very natural area that had little development, and being in nature and purposefully walking into those places and areas that are called wilderness, and actually listening to those conversations of the river. And I mean, I say that, it's like were times when I would swear that someone was talking outside of my camp, and it was just the river. It was not just the river, it was the river or the creek or the stream that was nearby. And I believe that really set me on the journey of I don't want to say enlightenment, maybe it is enlightenment, but on a place of listening and learning, and listening and learning. And once I started on that journey, they just, it was all one. It was like walking and not speaking were part and parcel of the vehicle that I was was given to. And now writing about that, I wrote every day I wrote. And there's somebody said, if you do something for 10,000 hours, then you become really good at it. You might become a master. Well, I'm sure I wrote 10,000 hours, and I walked that much, 10,000, and I didn't speak that long. So, but I wrote every day. First, I would write because I didn't really think I was a writer or knew how to write. I wrote what the weather was like, and just being able to describe the weather. And it was raining. Well, what kind of rain? The native people up in Alaska, they have like, I don't know, 50 or 70 words for snow, the kinds of snow. Well, how can we describe rain? And that there are different ways to describe it. And so being in it a lot got me to write and look for ways to talk about the rain, to write about the rain, to write about the wind, to write about the water, to write about the trees, to write about nature, not just, well, and there was a tree, and then there was some water by the tree, and so just looking different ways of writing, different ways of saying that, and practicing that just as a part of my daily life. And if I made a painting, when I first started painting watercolors, just before I stopped talking, I got a book and I painted every day. And the watercolors that I painted, once I started painting, but that was my job. I realized if I made a painting that day, boy, I did what I needed to do, and I felt fulfilled. And so every day I painted, every day I painted, every day I wrote, and eventually it got to the place where I thought I would write a book. And fortunately, I had an editor, because the book would be like this, and the editor made it like that. So you guys didn't have to go through all of everything that I wrote. Did I answer that question? Because maybe I did, or maybe I didn't.
Well, I think we could try some of the other questions, and it might have pieces of your answer in there.
Okay.
So the next question is from Kristen McEwen, who's been an ANA speaker herself, and she writes, "Thank you so much. You're a marvelous inspiration. And can you say something about what delighted you most when you began to speak again? And what was hardest or most surprising for you?"
Good question. And what I started speaking, and I tried to read. I remember trying to read Linton Caldwell's quote, which is about the environmental crisis was one of mind and spirit, and we could be mistaken if we just thought it was about pollution and loss of species and habitat, and that it's about who we are and who we have to become if we're going to survive. And that, just as an aside, that quote in one of my environmental books, I think it was Living on the Earth, was so important to me that I went and found him. And I just had to meet him. He was a professor in Indiana. So I met him just before he passed away. And I read that quote, and it was so hard to read. It was so hard to read because you have to look at it, read it, and then you have to do through all these things have to happen in your body before it comes out and you form the lips and your language can say it. And I went, God, that was really hard. I'm going to just go around from each table to table and I'll talk to people. So that's what I did is I went from table to table and spoke to people just after I had started speaking. And it was a lot easier, to do that. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being able to speak to people finally after listening for so long. And it was like I listened for so long and I got to this place where I thought I had something to say. And so that's why I started speaking. I had something to say, and it was about environment. Now, that day, I was due to go meet with King Jordan, I guess it was the first deaf president of Gallaudet. And it was funny that I started speaking and I'm going to go meet with the deaf president. And I had learned sign language before when I had stopped speaking. So I could stop and I spoke in sign language to schools and places where deaf children were. And they were really amazed that I had given up speaking to do sign language to be with them. And so here I am on my bicycle now, because I still don't ride in cars, riding over to Gallaudet College when the car came out of the corner of my eye and I was hit by a car. And I'm thinking, come on, I started talking and the next thing that's happened is I get hit by a car. Somebody's telling me, the universe, it could have been a lightning bolt coming out, right? Saying, and there I am lying in the streets of Washington, D.C. when the ambulance pulls up. And some guy pulls up before the ambulance and he looks at me and he says, "Don't worry, John. I work for a lawyer and I saw the whole thing. And I knew I must be dead because, I work for a lawyer. I saw the whole thing. We're going to get a lot of money." And then I blacked out. When I came to, there were the EMTs and they were cutting my shirt and everything. And they said, "Okay, we're putting them into the ambulance." They carried me into an ambulance and strapped me in. And here I am now, strapped in an ambulance. I just started talking after 17 years, and now I'm going to go for my first automobile ride. This is really not a good thing. And finally, they're talking around me about where they're going to go. And finally, I say to one of the EMTs who's doing all the strapping and stuff, I said, "So where are we going?" And she says, "We're going to take you to Howard University Hospital." And I said, "How far is that?" She goes, "Oh, it's about 5. We'll be there in 5 minutes." I said, "I could probably walk." And she stopped and they all stopped and they looked at me and they said, "You were just in a car accident. So a car just hit you." And I said, "Yeah, but I could walk." And they go off and they say, they have a conference, and the woman who's strapping me down, she looks at me and she says, "What's the matter? Are you afraid of cars?" And I said, No. And she goes, "Is this some kind of religious thing that you don't ride in cars?" I said, No, I just don't ride in motorized vehicles." And she said, "Well, if it's not religious, what is it? Moral thing? Is it some?" I said, "Yeah, that's what it is. It's a kind of a moral, ethical thing for me, not to ride in motorized vehicles." And she said, "And how long have you done this?" And I said, 17 years. I didn't talk for 17 years. I just started talking yesterday. And that's when they looked at me and they said, "Okay, let's take him to St. Elizabeth's," which is for psychiatric evaluation. But I was so sure that I wanted to walk to the hospital that they finally said, "Okay, we're going to let you walk, but you shouldn't. You're going to go into shock." And so they I had to sign some things and they let me out. So I stepped out on the street, and that's when the guy who worked for the lawyer said, "Oh no, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're ruining it. You're ruining it." So I found that when I started talking and explained that I had worked that I didn't speak for 17 years, that was like, I maybe I shouldn't have said that because I was going to get into trouble. So how about that? Just an answer.
Well, we have so many questions here. I'm just going to go in order. We probably won't get to all of them. The next question is from Paul Richmond. He says, "Thanks so much. What can you say about Black Lives Matter and the environment and making more connections?"
Well, of course, I have a Black Lives Matter sign in front of our house and here in Cape May, and and somebody asked me. They said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "Well, I actually don't believe in race. I understand it. It's a social construct, and that we just made this up. And it doesn't mean that people aren't going to get hurt by this social construct that we've made up. And so that we have to, as I think Dina mentioned, decolonize, we have to de-racialize also. I believe that. And that's a conversation that's going to be one of those very difficult conversations that we're going to have. And that we have to remember that we have to be kind to each other, because some of us have so much tied up in the way that we've been relating to each other that it's going to be difficult. I don't believe it's impossible. I do believe that it's possible. But, I'm a supporter of Black Lives Matter. I think Black lives do matter. And then and I want to take it from there to say we all matter, but we understand when Black Lives Matter says, Black Lives Matter, why they say that and why they don't say, well, all lives matter. Well, they do matter, and they mean that as well. But, unfortunately, we are where we are. Let's keep moving.
Great. Here's a question from poet Roberta Hill. She says, "What do you see as challenges to water pollution that we should face now?"
Where I live here in Cape May, and a lot of things have to happen locally, that people have to, get involved in what's going on the ground where you are. What's going on the ground where we are is that the sea is rising and the ground is sinking. And so people who live on the ocean front or these communities, ocean communities, they are experiencing something, especially if they don't have sewer and that they have septic systems. And so the ocean is going to rise and the ground is going to sink. This is going to happen. And I'm not trying to be like Chicken Little saying the sky is falling. It's the science. And what are we going to do to help people who live here? Usually the people who have the septic systems and don't have the sewer are marginalized community, marginalized people. And so we have to deal with that. Do we get everyone sewer? Do we we have an infrastructure bill? Are we going to use it to equalize some things? And that's what I would say, but you have to locally look at where things are and really get in there and work. But remember the kindness part. That's the challenge.
Robin writes, "Do you have hope that we will learn to really listen to ourselves and to each other? If yes, what is the source for you?"
I do. I mean, I do have hope. And it's hard sometimes to say that if you look at what's going on in the world. But I do have hope. And it's one of the reasons, writing a children's book, that we start off with our children, because our children are the future. And I can remember somebody saying that to me, and God, here I am, but we have to teach it. We have to not just say it, we have to show it. And I guess the the alternative of not believing that is that it's unacceptable. And so I'm believing that we're going to be able to do this. And let me begin by saying I'm going to practice that. And I think that each one of us has the power, and I'll say power, maybe it's your, can be your, that there's talking about what's your superpower? If you can listen, learn to listen to each other, that's a superpower. That's a superpower, and there's probably going to be some other ones that we're going to cultivate as well. But let's start with that. And I believe that's good that we do have that possibility of doing that.
Great. Poet Margaret Sarako writes, "Thank you for your amazing talk. Do you still walk rather than ride in motorized vehicles? And if not, do you miss walking?"
Good question. I still walk as long as I can. And I haven't walked for like a week. I've taken a time off, but I usually walk every morning, at least 2 miles a day. And I put on my, watch, those watches that tell you how many steps you take. I have to get 6,000 steps in to consider that I have walked. Now, in the morning, I get up and I sit for a half an hour, and then I go for a walk. And it's something that's just a part of my life, walking. And in May, I've started a walk back across the United States in 2005. I think it was when that CBS piece was mentioned that I was walking back across the United States. Well, we have only gotten, and I bring people with me, and sometimes students who I'm teaching a class in Planetwalking. We are in Illinois, the border of Illinois and Indiana, and headed up to Madison, Wisconsin, where I have done my PhD work. And that's about 214 miles away. So I don't think we'll get there this year. We're going to start off again on May 19th and walk until May 26th. Yeah. And continue walking. And then the following year we'll keep walking. So yeah, walking is a part of my life. And I also haven't walked across Africa yet. And so I'm working on organizing a walk across Africa, at least in part of it.
Great. Mina writes, "All of this is so inspiring and incredible, from being resolute to not riding in a car to not speaking for so long. It blows my mind that you made it through your PhD program and even taught classes while not speaking. Can you talk more about the approaches you use to adapt to and accomplish this within an academic framework?"
Yeah, that's a good question too. But when I had been doing this for so long that when I showed up to a university, it usually, as I had written when I wrote to the people in Montana, I wrote them and I said, I don't ride in cars and I don't talk. And I explained why. And I want to be part of the environmental studies program. I want to study. Well, they thought that was wonderful. And they showed me, and I wrote this in 2 books. One is in the book I just wrote about kindness. But when I got there, it took me 2 years. I said I would be there in 2 years. And they said, okay, we'll be waiting. And they made me a resident of the school of Montana because I was on my way there. So that number one, I only had to pay in-state tuition. And number two, when I got there, I had no money. And so the director of the program gave me $150 and he said, go register for 1 credit, reading and conferencing, and you're going to South America, aren't you? And I kind of shook my head. I had no clue. And reading and conference on the hydrological systems of South America, rivers of South America. So, and what the professors had done, he said, the professors are so excited that you're going to come to the school that they have agreed to let you take their class without registering for them. Take all the exams, and then they'll save those exams, your score, your grade, until we can figure out how to get the rest of the money to pay for that classes. And then you can register for those classes, and then they'll just give you the grade. You don't have to attend. Now, I never heard of financial aid that was like that, And so I take that as generosity, compassion, and kindness. And I later got a scholarship, the Erasmus Award, which paid for all my school there. So I am forever grateful for the generosity and the kindness and compassion that was shown to me on my journey, whether it was in just on the road or in my academic institutions. And not to say that there were not people who were not as supportive, or who thought poorly of someone who was not going to speak, or who didn't ride in cars, who would do this. I think, and people would ask me, well, how do you put up with those people? And it's like, oh, those people are some of the most important people in your journey, or the ones who are going to stand up and say, stand in your face and try to get you to stop. Because without them, you won't really have any pushback. You won't really be able to discover who you really are, without people saying, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. And you being able to go around that, or listening to that and hearing it, but still going on and becoming the person that you need to be, and so it's all important, the people who are kind to you and the people who are not.
We only have 3 minutes left, and I'll skip to this question. Jenny would like to hear an example of kindness that stands out to you from your journey.
Could you ask that question once more for me?
An example of kindness that stands out for you from your journey across the country.
Oh, just one is, there's hundreds and hundreds but there's just one that just pops out in my head just right now, because I've gotten a letter or emails from these kids. Says people have took me in, right? And they said, look, you stay here with us and we're going to feed you. And I've been taken in by people. They don't know me. They just see me on the road. They said, we've seen you for 2 years walking up, from California. Now you're in Wyoming and you're walking still. Why don't you stay with us when you get to our house? And I knock on the door and stay at their house. And they put me in the bedroom of their children. Says, we only have this one, the bottom bunk. You can stay in that. Little Billy's up on top. Okay. They put me in the bottom bunk of their children. And 20 years later, I get emails from the kid going, you won't remember me, but my name is Billy. You were on the bottom of my bunk, and my mom told me that you didn't talk. So when I got up, you didn't say anything, and that you played the banjo. That kind of stuff is just like, it tears at me. I still, think, gosh.
Well, it's been a real honor to have you with us, Dr. Francis. Thank you so much for your wonderful story. And we're all looking forward to your book coming out later this year. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll see you at the schmoozing part of the.
That's fantastic. We look forward to seeing you there.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.